What if I told you that for nearly 500 years, we've been reading the most influential letter in Western history wrong? Martin Luther thought the book of Romans was about one thing: how a guilty individual gets right with God through faith alone. That reading shaped Protestantism, shaped Western culture, shaped how millions of people think about religion. But over the last 40 years, scholars have mounted a devastating case that Luther missed the point. The heart of Romans isn't about you, it's about something much bigger. So what did scholars discover when they looked again? First, let's establish the old map. For centuries, the standard reading of Romans went like this. Paul's great theme is justification by faith. Humans are sinful, unable to save themselves, and God offers righteousness as a free gift through faith in Jesus Christ. The proof texts come from chapters 1 through 8, especially chapter 3, verses 21 through 28. Luther built the entire Reformation on these passages. Calvin systematized them into a theology that conquered the Western world. And chapters 9 through 11, most readers treated them as a detour, a tangent where Paul wrestles with the fate of his fellow Jews before getting back to the real argument. Modern scholarship has flipped this map. Researchers now argue that chapters 9 through 11 aren't a digression. They're the climax. The entire letter builds toward one question: what is the relationship between Israel and the nations? That word nations matters. When Paul writes Gentiles, he's using the Greek word ethne, which means nations, peoples, every non-Jewish people on earth, Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Persians, all of them. The central question of Romans isn't how does a guilty individual find grace? It's how does the God of Israel relate to every people on the planet? That's a radically different letter. To understand Paul, you need to enter the worldview he inhabited. The term is Jewish apocalyptic theology. Apocalyptic doesn't mean catastrophe. It means revelation, the unveiling of God's hidden plan for history. Here's what many Jews of Paul's era expected. When the Messiah arrives, he overthrows Israel's oppressors and establishes God's kingdom. And then something extraordinary happens. And the nations of the world stream to Jerusalem's temple. They bring gifts. They abandon their idols. They worship Israel's God. This wasn't a fringe belief. The prophets proclaimed it repeatedly. Hosea declared, "The people who are not my people will be my people." Isaiah envisioned all nations flowing to Zion. Micah, Zechariah, the Psalms, they all echo this expectation. The end of days means the ingathering of the nations into the worship of Israel's God. Now, here's the key. Paul believed the Messiah had already come in Jesus. The resurrection proved it, which meant this prophesied ingathering of the nations wasn't a distant hope. It was underway right now. Right? And Paul believed he was his chosen agent, the apostle to the nations. Now that we have the framework, let's look at Paul's most stunning passage, Romans chapter 11, verses 13 through 24. Paul addresses Gentile believers directly and gives them a metaphor. Israel is an olive tree. The roots are God's covenant with the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. The natural branches are the Jewish people. Some of those natural branches have been cut off. These are Jews who haven't accepted Jesus as Messiah. And while olive branches, that's the Gentiles, have been grafted into the spots where natural branches were removed. Right? Pay close attention to the direction of movement here. The Gentiles are joining Israel's tree. They are not planting a new one. Paul then issues a warning that echoes across 2,000 years. He tells the Gentile branches, do not boast against the natural branches. If you do boast, remember this, you do not support the root. The root supports you. This is incorporation theology, not replacement theology. The technical term for replacement theology is supersessionism, the idea that the church replaced Israel, that God transferred his covenant from Jews to Christians. Paul rejects this explicitly. The tree belongs to Israel. The roots are Israel's. The Gentiles are guests grafted into someone else's tree by grace. Any Gentile who claims ownership of the tree has fundamentally misunderstood their position. Then Paul reveals what he calls a mysterion, not mystery in the modern whodunit sense. A mysterion is a divine secret now being disclosed for the first time. Here it is, Romans 11, verses 25 and 26. A partial hardening has come upon Israel until the full number of the Gentiles has come in, and so all Israel will be saved. Read that again slowly. All Israel will be saved. Paul claims that Israel's current hardening, their partial rejection of Jesus as Messiah, is temporary and serves a cosmic purpose. The logic unfolds in three stages. First, a partial hardening falls on Israel. Second, that hardening creates space for the full number of Gentiles to enter. Third, once the Gentile ingathering is complete, God restores all of Israel. Paul doesn't explain the mechanism. He declares it as divine mystery and moves on. And this is a breathtaking claim of universal salvation for the Jewish people, accomplished not through human effort, but through God's mercy encompassing all. The cut branches will be grafted back in. If this reading is right, it changes everything about who Paul was. Here's a fact that surprises most people. The words Christianity and Christians appear nowhere in Paul's letters, not once. Search all 7 of his undisputed letters: Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, Philemon. 0 results for Christianity, 0 results for Christians. Paul never named a new religion because he never conceived of one. Look at the words Paul does use. He calls himself apostle to the ethne, the nations. He calls his communities ecclesia, assemblies. He speaks constantly of Israel, of the nations, of God's covenant faithfulness. His entire vocabulary is Jewish. His entire framework is Jewish. He's operating inside Judaism, not outside it. His controversial statements about the law confirm this. When Paul says Gentiles don't need to follow Torah, he's not rejecting Judaism. He's answering a Jewish question. On what terms do the nations enter Israel's covenant? His answer was radical. The nations enter through faithfulness to the Messiah, not through becoming Jews. That's a Jewish theological argument, not a Christian one. Rather than the first Christian theologian, Paul may be one of the most radical Jewish theologians of the ancient world, a man who believed the Messianic age had begun, that the prophesied ingathering of the nations was underway, and that he was its instrument. Paul wasn't building a church, he was grafting the world into a tree.